Welcome to episode 15 of More Than Just Maps. I'm your host, Ollie Powers. This podcast was created with the intent to help anyone in the GIS field get from where they are now to where they want to be that your first job, a career move, or just improving your GIS game overall. On this week's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with not one guest, but two. Caitlyn McNabb of Cederu and Micah Babinsky of CDR McGuire join me and talk about how they got into this big wide world of GIS. Both are members of ERISA's Vanguard cabinet and have been able to greatly expand their careers thanks to the experiences they've gained, not only from ERISA events, but a multitude of opportunities. And now for part one of my interview with Caitlyn and Micah. Welcome to the first podcast of 2021. On today's episode, I have two guests with me. I have Caitlyn McNabb, Implementation Manager for Cederu, and Micah Babinsky, GIS Analyst for CDR McGuire. Welcome, you two.
Hey, Ollie.
Thank you.
So let's get started. Let's dive into your backgrounds. Caitlyn, let's start with you and how you got started into GIS.
Sure. Well, I actually started in archaeology. I did my master's thesis was a GIS approach to understanding irrigation systems in ancient Peru. And I went on to start my PhD and had a pretty severe back injury and had to leave the field altogether. Kind of got lucky because I ended up working for a land surveying company that needed a GIS technician, and I had these GIS skills because of my degree. And so most of my career I spent working with land surveyors and engineers as the sole GIS person at that company for the most part.
Okay.
And then recently, about a year ago, transitioned to working for Cederu, which is a GIS-based CMMS asset management system.
Okay.
That ironically works with water utilities. So it's kind of come full circle. Now I'm doing GIS for water all over again. So
Awesome.
That's my roundabout story and how I got into GIS.
Cool. And Micah, how about you? How did your GIS journey start?
Well, I am probably in a somewhat unique situation because I grew up hearing about GIS since I was a little kid. My dad, Greg Babinsky, is a GIS professional, and he's like Mr. GIS. In my world, there's no one more passionate and more dedicated to GIS as a profession. So, he was working in the field since I was a little kid, so I grew up hearing about it. But it was always kind of like, all right, whatever, Dad, who cares? But I always loved, yeah, like kids do with their parents. But I always loved map-based computer games like SimCity 2000. Age of Empires. There's this one called Europa Universalis, which is like super geeky, kind of historical based, map based game. But so I always loved these. And, when I got into university, I was starting to check out some geography courses at University of Washington, more for the sort of like the social justice angle and like global economic development angle, that they have a really cool program there. And I just decided, I remember my dad talking about GIS. I'll take an intro class, and I fell in love with it. I thought, this is awesome. It's like I'm playing SimCity 2000, but, with real professional software and understanding the geographic principles behind how it all gets applied. So I just continued on, and it was a great, a great way to explore that interest. And I started out at a nonprofit, kind of doing like mobility and transit type work, and then I got into local government. I've been doing GIS ever since.
Nice. So we actually have slightly similar stories there. My mom actually started, it wasn't called GIS when she started, but she was still doing cartography back
awesome.
on, like, she'd use like Fortran, I think.
Cool.
Fortunately, she didn't quite pursue that, but very similar, like, okay, sure, I know what you're talking about.
Well, I thought I was special, but I guess I'm not.
It's slightly similar, not exactly the same, but that's really neat. So I guess for the both of you, this question would apply. So when you, and Caitlyn, your answer might be a little bit different because you had already been working for the surveyor. but when you had finished school, what were some of the things that you did to get into your first positions? Because that's something that's really tough when you first finish school, whether it's a GIS degree or an archaeology degree or any kind of degree, is just getting that first job. So what are some strategies that you used?
Wow, that's a tough question. You're making me think back to that first job. You know, I just put everything that I am out on the table. I am very opinionated and I'm in your face and I'll say what I'm going to say. And I think that my first employer, which wasn't a GIS job, I think they really appreciated that. I was working for a nonprofit private school that catered to students with learning disabilities like ADD and dyslexia in Lubbock, Texas. And I think that going into an interview, whether it's your first, second interview or you're just having a casual conversation with a potential employer, is to just be yourself. I think that there's a lot. I've been on the hiring end in more recent years, and I found that people who are maybe disingenuous or trying to kind of cover up their flaws or feel insecure about one thing or another, it almost feels like they're hiding something. And that I've almost always hired somebody because they bring part of who they are to the table. They're not
Have
just
you noticed
a drone.
That is more with like entry-level positions, or is that just across the board at no matter what level of position that it's with?
Because I didn't really have any formal GIS education like you guys might have had, I have always taken this approach that, GIS is a skill and a tool, and anybody can be taught that skill or taught how to use that tool as long as they have the right qualities. Like, they're teachable, they are eager to learn, they're passionate about succeeding. Those are kind of the things from the hiring end that I always looked for. And I can't say that that's the same for everyone, but I got lucky my first GIS job with the land surveyors, because that's how they hired as well. And honestly, every job I've had since then has kind of taken that approach. Now, I don't know if that's a really good representation of what the industry is like, but that's what my experience was.
And I think that's a good approach to take. I've sat in on interviews before. I've never done the hiring itself, but between interviews I've sat in on and just my own personal experience with interviewing, usually the ones where you're more of yourself are the ones that go really well, and the ones where you're trying to impress and you're not sure about it, those are the ones that usually go pretty poorly.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that there are probably plenty of employers out there. I on LinkedIn and various blogs that I follow, there's plenty of anecdotal evidence that employers want you to have, all of these skills that you would expect out of a 5 or 7 year long experience in an individual, but they're hiring for an entry level position, or they're really focused on the skill set and not necessarily the fit, like the cultural fit within the company.
Yeah, because like you just said, a skill can be taught.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, not with the current company I'm with, but the last one, my favorite person to work with and my favorite hire was somebody who had absolutely no experience in GIS.
Nice.
And she was just so eager to learn and grow and take, she took all these Esri MOOCs because she wanted to learn more, even though she knew she didn't want to be in GIS forever. She took what she learned from being in that position and took what she could and applied it to what her true goals were. And that's who I want to work with. And fortunately, in my career, that's who my employers have wanted to work with as well.
That's really good to hear. Micah, so how about you? What nuggets of wisdom can you share with everyone on how your transition from student and permanent learner to industry went?
Well, I don't want to oversell my ability to advise people who are looking to get into the industry because one of the trends that I've seen is just the standard of like the skill set that college grads come that graduate with today is so much higher than it was when I graduated. So yeah, it's Kate is right on when it's like yeah, you can't just rely on those raw skills. It's there's got to be something more. And so my experience, it really did come down to putting it out on the table. So the Washington Urissa GIS conference in 2010, I presented one of the reports, one of the projects I'd done in school at the it's called the Dick Thomas Student Presentation Awards, a student presentation competition at this conference. My partner and I presented. It was about looking at access to bike lanes in the city of Seattle and exploring the correlation with income and other sort of markers of affluence. And, our project was pretty good. We got third place. That third place is what got me into GIS because I saw an opportunity come across a student job list. I applied, I got an interview, and I was able to say, like, look, here's the flaws and the shortcomings in our research. And I knew what a Z-score was.
Okay.
Sometimes those little statistical things what I could say, understanding like these census tracts, they're different sizes. We're having and understanding how to like really showing that you can think analytically, not just use tools or make maps. And that interview, my boss who hired me, she said it was that you were able to communicate the shortcomings in your project that was just as significant as your ability to make maps and use ArcGIS. So that really got it in there and just got me sort of over that hump. So I was working when I was still in school, which I know it's so hard. It's so hard to get into an entry level job. So yeah, persistence, and then showing that you can have that analytical mindset and be curious and be able to ask questions is really key.
For sure. Any job where I've come back, or job interview where I've come back with questions for them that make them think has gone a lot better than just, oh no, I don't have any questions, and praying that you're going to get a job. And you're so nervous when you're in an interview, but
Yeah.
being really engaged in that interview helps a lot more, and it gives the people that you could potentially be working with a much better insight into you, whether if they want to work with you and if you want to work with them, because it might be the case that you don't really want to work for somebody. I've definitely walked out of an interview before because I didn't like who I was supposed to be working with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a big part of, I believe a big part of what being a GIS professional is all about is framing the question and finding ways that location and geography applied can solve problems. And if an organization is not open to a GIS professional posing questions and identifying solutions and being creative, you're not really gonna. I hate to generalize, but I think as an aspiring GIS pro, you're not going to grow in an environment like that.
Yeah, and you're just going to be miserable in the job.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are looking for a place where they can, I don't want to say settle, but grow some roots and help a company expand most of the time. You don't want to just be in there unless there are circumstances where you do want to have like a temporary job, but I think for the most part you want to stay with a company and grow with them, and if you're going to be miserable there, that's not the place you're going to grow.
No doubt.
So another thing I want to ask, so how I know both Micah and Caitlyn, you're both on the Vanguard cabinet, the Urissa Vanguard cabinet. Can you explain a little bit about how you got involved with that?
Wendy. I was at a GIS Leadership Academy in Austin, and I met Wendy for the first time in person, and she was like, you should apply to do this, and she caught me at a time when I was really looking for a community of other GIS professionals, because I had spent so much of my career being the only GIS person. And not only that, I started off in a rural community. So there wasn't like, there was a chapter nearby, a EURISA chapter nearby, that I could go and meet other people and exchange ideas.
That must have been super tough.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it was okay because I worked with great people that were really smart and open, you know, to an extent, to what Micah was saying, like open to GIS ideas and growth. And so I was fortunate to work with a company that was really open to that, expanding that side of the company. However, like I said before, not having a formal GIS education and being the only GIS person and kind of living in this vacuum, I like really craved that like exchange of ideas, right?
Yeah, I imagine that was putting a lot of pressure on you because you're expected to be like the person and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know everything. I feel like I should know. At least that's how I assume I would feel.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
No, absolutely. And I struggled with, you know, buzzword is imposter syndrome for a very long time.
Okay, even people who have the GIS education suffer with imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Well, that's good to hear. I guess I'm not by myself. So
Nope, not at all. Micah, how about you? How did you get involved with the Vanguard Cabinet?
So it really started, it was 2012. So long before I even got like, you know, heavily involved with like EURISA. 2012, the GIS Pro conference, EURISA's annual conference, was in Portland, Oregon, where I live. And I was like, you know, just getting into the industry. I'd moved to town the year before. I was on my third like short-term temporary GIS job, just working part-time. And I'd always heard about this thing, Python. Like, oh, if you're in GIS, you should learn Python. And there was a 2-day workshop at GIS Pro. So it was a Python workshop. So I just was like, all right, I'll go check this out. I didn't really, you know, I'd done a little bit of like, you know, gotten like a Python book that teaches you how to make the asteroids game.
Yeah.
But so big things happened for me at that conference. One, I took that Python course, which changed my career and arguably my life. Number two, I met some members of what was then the very early on EURISA Vanguard Cabinet. I didn't really understand like what EURISA was, how it worked. Again, my dad was heavily involved with it, but I basically still tuned out a lot of what he said about it.
Okay.
But I met these people and they were like, dude, Micah, join the EURISA Vanguard Cabinet. And I was like, oh, you're not going to want me. You know, I barely know what I'm doing here. You know, I'm not even sure I belong here. And I didn't turn right around and apply to be on the Vanguard Cabinet, but it planted the seed. And so years later, when it was time, when I was like really struggling kind of at work to stay motivated, to stay inspired, and to like be excited about GIS, all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, EURISA, there's this community here that wants me to be here, and it's beyond the walls of my organization. And I was kind of like, yeah, you know, I think I have some of this enthusiasm, some of these ideas like Caitlyn was talking about. And so I'm just lucky, you know, really lucky I decided to apply and got a spot on the Vanguard Cabinet. And now it's like, yeah, it's like I have it's like my career's got like a second wind. So it's been awesome.
That's really cool to hear. So as you guys have been working with Vanguard Cabinet and you've been able to meet a ton of people through that organization and probably EURISA as well. Now, Caitlyn, I know you were part of the Rocky Mountain chapter, correct?
Yes, I am the outgoing president for Rocky Mountain chapter, but I'm living in the Smokies now, so.
And Micah, you're part of another EURISA chapter, correct?
Yeah, I am a proud member and supporter of the Oregon and Southwest Washington chapter of EURISA.
Okay. So I'm going to assume that you got involved with the chapters probably before you got involved with the Vanguard Cabinet. But how has being a member of EURISA and a member of the chapters, how has that helped you in your career? You've given some really good points already just with the Vanguard Cabinet. But what else can you let everybody know about how that has helped you in general?
the reason I am in my current position, which is a dream, is because of my involvement with Urissa and my local chapter. John Nolte, the former president of the Rocky Mountain chapter, and he's currently the treasurer of Rocky Mountain Urissa, put me in touch with he actually put my name up as a candidate to this company, Setaru, a year ago. And it was weird. I went to the GIS Pro conference in New Orleans, and I walked away from that conference with like 5 different job offers. And none of them felt quite right, except for one other job offer that I was really seriously considering. And then all of a sudden this one came up, and it is purely because of my work with the Vanguard cabinet really kind of put a spotlight on the fact that I am hardworking and passionate and dedicated to the industry. And then also the connections that you make within Urissa locally or nationally, like opens those doors for you. I mean, like I feel like I'm advertising for Urissa, but I mean, it really is the perfect storm of, connections and mentoring and being able to demonstrate to your peers.
Yeah, and I think that it doesn't have to just be Urissa. I think that can apply to like any professional organization, as long as you're getting involved with it. It's one thing to sign up on a website and say, oh yeah, I'm a member. It's another thing to show up to events, to participate, to volunteer, to really get involved and get to know your fellow members. That's where the magic happens.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better.
Micah, how about you?
Yeah, so like I already mentioned the impacts that chapter involvement had in terms of my presentation at the student competition in Washington. But I mean, here in Oregon Urissa is kind of a reflection of the GIS community in this state and also in neighboring Washington state. It feels like a family. It's like everybody, you sort of show up at the gatherings and everybody's like, oh yeah, there's the PBOT, Portland Bureau of Transportation, folks. There's the, the Department of Forestry people. There's the, and people really come together, and it just builds this sense of like, yeah, I belong here. It's a welcoming group. And, our annual conference in Oregon is GIS in Action. Every April. You should check it out if you're interested. It's going to be online again this year, but it's so encouraging of students, and there's always a great contingent of people from like the big universities like Portland State and University of Oregon, but also the smaller technical colleges across the state and in more rural parts of the state. And so it's just being involved. I've presented at the conference. I've helped organize events. I've served as a mentor on a mentoring pilot program, and right alongside the geospatial information officer, basically the head GIS officer for the state of Oregon. So just the ability to be inspired and also to offer up whatever little bits of enthusiasm that I can give that might make the difference between someone, forming a career and forming a life in GIS, or moving on to something else. It's just, yeah, it's been a great avenue to get inspiration and hopefully for me to make an impact.
That's fantastic. Before we finish off this segment, do you guys want to add anything else to just your experience of getting into industry, moving around within industry, or any other sage nuggets of advice that you can give to the inexperienced and the experienced?
I just want to drive home a point that we covered before, which is that not every interview and not every company is going to be the right fit for you. You are valuable. Your skill set and what you bring to the table is valuable. And you are not going to an employer and, putting your hand out and asking for a job. They need to be asking for you as well. Does that make sense?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it has to be a good fit. If you need a job and it's just a job, that's that's fine. But when you're making strategic moves in your career, you need to really think about if that move or change or first job is going to get you to where you want to go, right? If it's a job just for now, make sure it's a job that you can, feel you can swallow working there, right? Like it's not, you don't feel icky. It's not, the company isn't
horrible,
horrible, or just, there's some sort of cognitive dissonance between like your beliefs and outlook and theirs, right? Which I have been in those positions as well, and before I got into my GIS career. So, you are valuable, and you need to be interviewing that company just as much as they are interviewing you.
For sure. Definitely agree. Micah, how about you?
Well, first of all, if you hear a little bit of a toddler screaming in the background, everything is under control. But, so first of all, I want to echo what Caitlyn said, because it's like you are valuable. And I would say this to anyone trying to get into the industry or trying to make their next move. It's like a lot of times, you get the question, what is GIS? What do you do? And it's sort of like, I got to explain this again. Man. But what I've come to learn, especially just in the last couple of years, it's like as a GIS professional, whether you are one now or whether you're going to be one, you are tasked with literally like modeling the reality of the world, the physical world and the conceptual world for an organization. And that is so, so important. I mean, just
love that. Sorry, that's like, you're blowing my mind right now. Like, I'm using that next time somebody asks me. I love that. Modeling the reality of the world.
Well, yeah, and I think it was like an Esri tagline that was like, it was something like that. So I got to give them credit, but it really is. There's a cartographer and GIS specialist here in the Portland area named Matthew Hampton, who he gave a presentation where he's like, you're sitting there, you're doing some digitizing, you place a vertex in one place on a map. That decision, it seems like so small, it's almost like nothing. But even something small like that, it's important. Like you are modeling reality for your organization and even people beyond that. So take it seriously and be proud is what I would suggest to people.
Well, that's really good advice from both of you. That's fantastic. Thanks so much. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Join us again in a couple of weeks for part 2, where we dive into the murky waters of burnout in the GIS industry.